Webcam microphone up close. Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was
but I have the files. You know, I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things, and I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, you know, fondle slab of choice, I don't know, computers, doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not just Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from, as long as it's real. It doesn't, it's hard to get real information. Because seriously, they don't want you to have these two sources whenever I try to prove out. You know, it's not. If you expect your government to tell you the truth, you're going to be sadly disappointed on another one of these things.
Dear Lord, what a dirty, dirty old man.
Really? Can't be serious. Is this really how you want things to be? Come on. More hooker, eruptions? Eruptions, whatever.
Like 8 hours, kind of.
Really?
Allegedly broadcast live from Pima Region 2, within the borders of the formerly united and currently occupied states of America. We bring you the Ochelli Effect.
I damn sure know I'm an original. We have all these situations. I'd love to know why it takes 50 years, for a 19-year-old girl to eventually get up to gumption to put these things out.
So, we are live once again on UCY.TV radio. This is the Ochelli Effect. You know, I am Chuck Ochelli, the host. Anyway, I gotta tell you that tonight I'm not gonna have a guest. I'm gonna do this solo, and there is a reason for it. You know, this very network, along with many others, throughout internet land, throughout the land of radio, truth speak type stuff, often refer to the work of one William Cooper. And we all know the story behind the guy. We all have an idea about his radio shows, his Kaji situation, his evolution of sorts as a truther, and people describe him as a groundbreaker, and the guy that influences just about everybody from little old nobodies like myself to the better known names in radio, etc., etc. What I'm going to do is something that was inspired by a couple of things. First of all, it was sort of necessary for me to start to get into this stuff because of our friend in chat, Desert Hawk there, who brings up a lot of things that have to do with the off-world type discussions, alternative energies, things like this. And I do pay attention to some of that stuff, but I don't really bring it out much because I am not super well researched on it, and I don't like to talk about things that I don't know much about. I feel bad every time I make a mistake, because I wasn't researched well enough, and sometimes I do say things that I should not. When it comes to certain areas, I spent a lot of time, I've gone through a lot of stuff, and I know things. But you know what? Sometimes I don't, and not everybody can know everything. I'm one of these guys who knows a little bit about a lot of things, but I have had particular areas of focus. Anyway, so here's the way this kind of came down, and I'm going to try and get into this as quickly as possible. And I sort of rushed into getting myself ready for tonight because I had other plans, but they went south on me quick. So instead, I devoted a good number of hours yesterday and today to trying to prepare this in between other personal issues. So hopefully this all makes sense and you guys can gather what I'm saying. So look, I'll tell you where my history with being aware of William Cooper, who again is the Hour of the Time guy that we hear, and I've been making jokes lately because on UCY we have exactly 3 very large blocks of time devoted to people who have passed away, so we are listening to replays of people like Mae Brussel, who I happen to appreciate and revere to some degree, Bill Cooper, who I do not revere very much, and Will Roberts, who I think and have only really recently been exposed to. I was somewhat aware of him before, but he's the guy who does the vocal local deal, and I have a neutral sort of feeling on him, although it seems to me as though I'm dealing with somebody who has some very good intentions. Outside of that, I don't know what to say about Will Roberts because I've never taken the time and I sort of accept what he has to say at face value. It all seems very logical, very sensible. And so do a lot of people's, sort of understandings of things and presentations that we deal with in the new media, the blogosphere, as it were, or whatever it is you want to call it nowadays. I simply think of it as the media evolving, but which we are all a part of. Even those of us in these smaller situations, where we are parts of networks, and I'm very proud to be part of UCY.TV. Don't get me wrong, and don't think that I'm sitting here and biting the hand that feeds me by going after Mr. Cooper tonight. But I think it's necessary because off air, I have actually engaged now in arguments with people over the validity of Mr. Cooper's work, over the honesty of his presentations, and over the realistic possibilities of his actual agenda. So, and I mean so much so that these are not just passing little things. It has actually cost me a couple of radio guests and a couple of other people that that thought that I was defending the guy. It's so funny to me because it seems as though I come down as somebody who either defends him or is attacking him, and therefore am some sort of disinfo agent because I am attacking him. Either way, I'm basically being hung with this sort of really bad juju about the whole situation, and I don't quite understand it. Because, my opinion doesn't change, but the listener seems to interpret my opinion in a completely different fashion, depending on the listener. And as I said, some people in more what I would consider legitimate circles actually have gotten upset at me for legitimizing the guy by discussing him or even acknowledging him. And then others who are, more on the fringe, in my opinion. And I say my opinion because, as I learn and as I discover things, it seems as though the fringe is not so fringe. I've said it many times that I often feel as though I owe apologies to those who once wore tinfoil hats. And even on Thursday's discussion, which, again, I had Lee Pierre on, who was a fun guest to have on, and I just sort of relaxed and did a little bull session with the guy. The fact is that talking to that guy and understanding that he's a little more fringe than I am even, but you see how we were sort of on the same wavelength anyway. And it was kind of fun. And I enjoyed that. And I don't even mind that the guy corrected me, despite the fact I had seen some articles to the contrary. And really, outside of a cursory search of a couple of articles on the GM, well, the laboratory-grown chickens actually being used at KFC, I've seen articles to that effect, and I didn't have them in front of me. It was something I mentioned offhand, and believe it or not, look, I'll take the correction. And if anybody can honestly challenge me on anything, I'll be more than happy to accept being corrected, because I would much rather have the real information. I'm not after the hyperbolic rhetoric that so many others are. So, now that I've wasted a goodly 7 to 8 minutes of your time explaining myself as usual, I'm going to say this. I was a musician, and I was a kid, and in the mid-'80s, I had my suspicions about the Kennedy assassination, and thusly when conversations about it would come up, especially when 1988 was rolling around, because that was the 25th anniversary, the quarter-century observance of the events in Dealey Plaza toward the end of 1988. I was, well, let's see now, I guess I was 16 years old. And at the age of 16, though, I wasn't your typical 16-year-old. I was playing in bars. I was booking my own shows and actually making a living as a musician, because that business was accessible to me and did not require a particularly good amount of eyesight for me to be able to participate in, because as my regular listeners are well aware, I'm visually impaired. As my audience at that time was not aware, when I stepped on the stages of many of those local clubs and many of the larger sort of theaters and things like that, the typical use of things like strobe lights and things like that would actually render me completely blind while I was on stage. And quite often, although I was a heavy metal performer who did interact with the audience and actually jump into mosh pits, engage my audience physically, verbally, actually slam dance with these people, knock people out of the way, and all that kind of stuff, I did this without any sort of fear and without any eyesight generally. In fact, at one point I had a roadie whose sole duty during the setup for the shows, after carrying in some equipment, because I was a vocalist, I didn't require much, and that is what I spent most of my time doing. That guy, his name was Sean Winters. In fact, the one who did it for the longest amount of time, would literally lean over to me in a very loud club and explain to me when I was being positioned on the stage. I would be led, and I would have 2 steps before I got to the front of the stage. At 6 o'clock is exactly where I would find the first cymbal stand, and my bass player would be at exactly 8:20 or something like this, giving me a clock version from my start position to give me verbal cues so that I could memorize my position, because it was very likely that I would be rendered completely blind for anywhere from 5 to 30 or 40 minutes of my show. So this was my position at the time, and this is what I was doing. I also took the time to read, though, and explored as I went to other cities and met with people. I found myself finding little, used bookstores and places where you could find sort of underground publications and things like that. And because of my interest in the assassinations in the Vietnam War, based on personal issues with it, I sought out these things, and it led me into the Kennedy assassination. Later on in my teenage years, I would have problems retrieving the military files from my father, and this would lead me even further into that research. And I conducted all of this, and this stuff is known. Mostly I served as an assistant to others. Some of my work is published in books. Some of my work you will see in documentaries, small and medium anyway. I was never part of any of the larger ones, because it seemed as though they had no need for radical views on the assassination that were extremely different from the official story, unless they were completely so far out that they could serve to discredit the entire research community by stating things like, Jackie had actually killed JFK, or that the limo driver had shot him. This is not something that was atypical at the time. I mean, the use of an umbrella to possibly shoot Kennedy, things like this, thoroughly discredited, kind of messy stuff. I seem to be receiving a message, and I don't know who it is from, but at this time I'm not going to take any calls. Let's see. So, the bottom line here, though, is that this is the context in which I started to engage in this stuff. Now, because of my interest in music, I also engaged in what I would call tape trading. This is, again, before the advent of the internet, so people like myself would concoct lists of our little personal collections of audio and videotape, which was either rare or illegally recorded, or of some sort of significance, because broadcast quality quality tapes of things that had occurred, or even recorded tapes of broadcasts or otherwise interesting footage, were not always so easily attainable. It's not as simple as uploading it to YouTube and a million people could access it in a matter of minutes. At that time, voluntarily mailing them to each other, getting to know a couple of friends, like let's just say you had a list of 10 things. Well, if you mailed that list of 10 things to 2 people or 3 people, and they each saw a few things on there, you would have terms and conditions by which you would trade. You would trade equal amounts of time, and you agreed upon, a certain standard of quality for your video or audio tape, etc., etc. This was a standard way of trading, like I said, bootleg and interesting things. So I got myself on a lot of mailing lists. Not only that, but it was standard practice as a musician to engage in sort of the use of mailing lists. And, I guess we really did sort of fund the post office a lot better back then, because think about all the business that they got from every local band, tape trader, researcher, etc. There were actually sort of correspondence circles that went on among some very well-known authors, some very intelligent people who sort of conducted open source investigations into things. And if you collected a list of people from all across the country, well, imagine the logistical sort of reality that would make things even better when you wanted information. So as I sat in New Jersey or New York and someone wanted some information about the about the streets of New York and how they particularly applied to the situation regarding the Malcolm X assassination at the Audubon Ballroom or something like that, and you lived in California and you knew that Chuck O was out in New Jersey, he might be able to go to New York a lot sooner than you would, and you could simply add that letter or send a singular letter to me, and maybe I would do you that favor and collect that photograph or that map or something for you. Like I said, this is a slower and more, dinosaur-like process compared to what it is we do now. We can just email these things, And the fax machine was a nice advent as well, but even back then, that was sort of, a little expensive. So, this sort of conduct, just to give you the flavor for the time, the understanding of the time, randomly one day, for no apparent reason, and these things would happen to me, as a result of me being parts of these mailing lists. And I actually had 2 different names for my mailing lists because I wanted to keep my sort of conspiratorial, send me any sort of weird, bizarre, or illegal videotape that you may have, under a different name, even though I was, not smart enough to understand that the FBI could easily monitor my address. I did change addresses several times, but I would have more than one name. I would put in more than one change of address card whenever this happened, and quite often packages would arrive that I did not expect. But it wasn't unusual because a few times a week, as I said, I would receive tapes, anything from Black Sabbath concerts to Beatles demos to, Elvis cursing in the studio, whatever it was I wanted, even at certain points getting a hold of raw news footage. Including the night of the RFK assassination. I had a complete a couple of hours of tape from a camera which was stationary, which I've only seen utilized in a very few places. I don't think the History Channel has ever gotten a hold of the tape I used to have. This is how I attained my first copy of the Zapruder film. This is how I attained my first copies of conferences being held in Dallas, Texas. Early on. This is how I obtained videotaped, representations of academic conclaves where there were conferences of professors and students discussing, debating, and scientifically examining evidence as it seemed to exist, regarding the Kennedy assassination. And this fascinated me, that so many different angles could be looked into. And as I said, this is, more than a quarter century ago that this started to pique my interest. So it is right around this time that a tape did arrive to me from a spot in, I believe it was Arizona. And that tape contained the now very widespread and very well-known work of one William Cooper. Well, the original name of it, because of the various edits that I have seen over the years, I believe it was Assassin Unmasked, although it may have been a black and white portion of it that was actually titled that, because there was another person's work which he had recorded on there, but there was in reality a bunch of other people's work on there. I'm going to drop one of the first links I have in chat for you from just a couple of things that I just really quickly collected from the internet. When I sat down to take my notes on this whole thing and wanted to recount in my mind the events and the reasons why I had been exposed to his work and why it is that I had never really valued it much and everything else, I first, in the midst of having a heated discussion with someone who knew me back then, was reminded that, and I knew I had gone to a live presentation that Mr. Cooper had done some years ago, but this being back in the days when I drank a bit more and was a bit more of a wild child, I would say that my memory may not have been real super clear about it. But this friend of mine happened to remind me that we had actually gone off somewhere and been on a little bit of a road trip to sort of examine the work of this man that we had sort of gotten to know because his tape had circulated on the underground. So the thing is that I was reminded of and then pointed to and then asked for a mailing of a copy of it from my friend's original VHS, which he still has. And he put it onto a DVD, one of those cheap Staples DVDs for me. But it turns out that after attending one of Cooper's presentations, that he had actually ordered the videotape. I guess a few other people have as well, because I found a version of it very similar, also online. Costs you nothing to find. At some point, I'll drop a link for that in the chat as well for you guys. Probably you've seen all this stuff before, but I wanted to show you that, it is not just me that saw this stuff, and, it's not my imagination what I'm going to go into just about now. Anyway, so, it was, according to the tape and according to my memory, and even according to a set of notes which was sent to me, because I always took notes when I attended these kinds of things, and I attended a few different things. A symposium on the actual proof that the Djinn, or the Jinn, D-J-I-N-N, existed, things like this. I was often invited to because of the sort of strange company I kept. At that time, I knew some pretty kooky people that were artists, musicians, and so on and so on. So they would often drag me to some pretty strange sort of places and get me into some odd things. Anyway, as I said, I believe I received that tape in 88 or 89. So it would make sense that I was 16 or 17, and I think the road trip must have occurred when I was 19 years old. According to the notes which I took last night, it was February of 91, and I guess it was in Atlanta, which I'll drop a link to the entire thing, or the seemingly entire thing, because as I remember it, it was over 6 hours, and it seems as though the videotape lasts about 4. So anyway, I'm going to give you a brief description of this stuff, and I'm going to try and go as rapidly as possible so as not to bore you guys to death. But here's the deal. I remember examining, that tape, like I said, the original Assassin Unmasked thing, which I have not seen the exact original version that I had online anywhere, but I've seen various edits of it over the years. It was the one that I got, actually. I took a little bit of time to examine it, and I determined what the sources of his video were and everything else. At certain points, and I've examined a couple of different versions of this, and, I concluded things like, back then I actually concluded that, let's see, that a Gold Star VCR was used to put the graphics up and things like that, which he put up, like, you know, his name and his telephone number on the screen and things like this. He had actually disconnected his XLR cable in order to give a blue screen, which was the result from his particular mechanism at the time. And this was the function of this particular type of VCR, which was not something that was commonly available on the market at the time unless you had certain models. I researched that to check that out at the time. You know, this was a Korean manufacturer of VCRs, stuff like that. Okay. Well, anyway, you know, I recognized that during the film he was using clips from a very often used piece of archival footage, you know, stuff that was official government, you know, documentaries like The Last 2 Days, things like that. This is where the typical scenes from the motorcade come from, usually in any documentary. This is where, you know, a lot of the stock footage where you see, you know, some color film of Parkland Hospital appears there. You see the Newmans on the grass, stuff like that. There was also Days of Drums and Lightning or something like this, but it was another couple of quick clips of other officially released films from documentaries that actually you could acquire from the National Archives now if you wanted to. And they were the types of things that were meant to be distributed to school children and all that kind of stuff. But they looked sort of rare and kind of cool to people that weren't familiar with the archival footage at the time. And, you know, it seemed to look as though he had some professional footage. Okay, so, let's see the official documents using. Okay, so, also, later edits wound up using the 1988 documentary done by Bob Richter, which was aired on Nova, which was a PBS show at the time. And, you know, and there was a couple of other special versions of this where he utilized some stuff from that show that, you know, now I'm drawing a small blank here, but there was a show which Leonard Nimoy used to host, which was, I forget the name of it, but there was a show there, and also the release of the Nostradamus movie, The Man Who Saw Tomorrow. I mean, there was certain, you know, pieces of videotape that he was utilizing, and he had made a great deal of these and mailed a lot of them out. Later on, he also got a hold of PBS footage of excerpts from the church committee. Although he says it's the HSCA, and then other times he does have footage of the HSCA, you know, the House Select Committee on Assassination, stuff like that. The Church Committee was one of the first places where there was a public awareness about, you know, the CIA assassination plots on foreign leaders, things like this. So, I mean, all of this seems pretty legitimate, right? Well, you know, the problem is, though, is that he still was using this version of the Zapruder film where he claimed that, you know, it could be plainly seen that William Greer, who was the driver of the limousine, had actually turned around and shot JFK in the face with a either chrome-plated pistol or a gas-powered pistol which fired a shellfish toxin style pellet, which was meant to be sure that the president had been assassinated, and you could see it clearly in his very blurry, muddy film. But here's the trouble, and that is that in 1991 he was very much promoting this film. He was very much promoting, of course, you know, Behold a Pale Horse. He was very much promoting and distributing this videotape. By this time he was charging money. I remember seeing that at one time it was $20, another time I think it was 40 or 50, you know, shipping included, and these were donations, and, you know, you had to get this special film from them. But it was really just a muddy version, and even at some points when he used these muddy versions, you could identify the fact that the color had been completely washed out. You could see remnants of the original broadcast, you know, artifacts from the Nova show, which I mentioned earlier, things like this. So I never quite understood, even at that time, not being fully awake and not being fully aware or even fully researched as I am today on this, the concept that, you know, that this was pretty fraudulent in my opinion, and the rest of his presentation did me no better as far as helping me to think anything other than he was quite the fraud. So let's see. Also by then the Garrison bootlegs had been out because Jim Garrison, as I've mentioned on the show several times, brought the trial of Clay Shaw, and actually subpoenaed Time Life to force them or to compel them to produce the Zapruder film for use for display or for showing in the courtroom there in New Orleans. During that process, the film had been illegally copied. D.A. Garrison was aware of that. Probably claimed for a very long time that he wasn't. The story sort of goes that a researcher named Penn Jones Jr., who was friends with Mae Brussel, and you might have even heard the Mae Brussel show with him on it, had actually gotten a hold of it. He was the guy who had the Midlothian mirror. I brought him up on another show, yada yada. But the point is that certain bootleg versions of the Zapruder film had begun to circulate at that point. This way, they made their way across many college campuses, and at one point, actually, most famously, Dan Rather himself was utilized in these presentations across these college campuses, stating that he had just come from the bidding over the Zapruder film by various media assets. He had gone in there with a really piss-poor bid from CBS, but he had wormed his way into the Zapruder office enough so that he could be shown the Zapruder film. So after watching it twice projected on a wall, he runs into his, KRLD, I think it was in Dallas, which was the CBS affiliate. This is how Dan Rather became famous. The Kennedy assassination, but he runs into there. This is, Saturday morning, I think. And, you can see you can see a piece of film if you look on the internet for it. But what they did on the college campuses is they sort of synchronized the violent back into the left movement of Kennedy's head with Dan Rather most famously, most exasperatedly, and almost out of breath saying, "I just watched the Zapruder film and I watched JFK's head go violently forward." Since the public would not see that film for at least another decade on broadcast television, he could say things like that. But how could that have been an honest mistake? There's a lot of debate about this. I don't believe it was. But anyway. So, the crisp, fresh Z film, a much crisper, much fresher Z film, had already been shown on television by the time Cooper started making his rounds and got himself involved in the precursor to the internet, the message board, the CompuServe sort of world, things like that. The Zapruder film had been aired in a couple of places. Not only it had been showed in parts on PBS and also on places on the BBC, but it had been aired in the 1970s. Various different versions of it, much cleaner, much more lengthy, and much more original than Cooper's copy of a copy of a copy. This is where he also introduced the idea that he had seen documents while he was, part of naval intelligence, and that a combination of William Greer, Division 5 of the FBI, the ONI, the CIA, and some other elements of some other agencies had conspired to murder John F. Kennedy due to the fact that he was printing constitutional money and he was the only one to do so. But not only that, because he was going to reveal the truth about the alien visitors from other worlds to the public. This is the Magic 12 or Majestic 12 or, the magic documents that have become legendary and have been thoroughly examined by many other people, much more in depth than I will ever bother to do. But, credit where credit is due. He networked using, VHS and beta distribution and the United States Postal Service mailing lists, clipboard mailing lists at his appearances and things like that, very similar to what we would do at the Musical Underground to sell our demos.
He had utilized public domain evidence and, had pretty much introduced us to the concept of, what would become the precursor to what I would call today open source media, where he encouraged people to look in the National Archives, to make Freedom of Information Act requests. And these kinds of things I don't object to, obviously. These are the kinds of things that I believe people should do so that they could at least begin to get, a sort of valid, estimation of the size of the lies that are being told to you. So anyway, at this little conference that I attended, this presentation of Cooper's, I sat down and revisited it for you guys so that I could give you a synopsis of it. There was a brief introduction, and I had some of my notes and I combined them with a score sheet that I kept that day and tried to recreate the score sheet as I watched the video. I think that the video is a little bit it doesn't share continuity exactly with my brain and maybe not with the event, because I think maybe the video had been stopped at certain points when he took breaks, and probably there were things that I remember in between, and that might account for my sort of warp in time. However, I really, let me just present what it was that happened there, and I'll just report it to you and leave it to your own judgment. Bill discusses his background in basic, talks about his childhood. His father was a United States Air Force pilot, a lieutenant colonel. His childhood, he flew in planes along with his dad, discussed with his father, and at some points he says with his parents. And this is a conglomeration of a couple of different presentations and things the concept of UFOs and extraterrestrials. He was a strategic air command person at the age of 18. He went into that business. Okay. Let's see. By way of drinking with former U.S. Air Force personnel, he learned from them about UFO interactions and all the U.S. military cover-ups that ensued. By means of mind control and memory erasure, they have kept, secret projects secret, is his assertion at this time, and he makes a big point of that. Let's see, the first stealth fighter flew in the 1970s, he says, but took until the early 90s for the public to become aware, and then at the age of 22, he goes into the Navy, despite having, from his own accounts and others' accounts, having been terribly afflicted with seasickness. He joined Submarine Command and explained stuff about retrofitting subs and having been stationed at Pearl Harbor, he says. I don't challenge the validity of any of his assertions regarding his military record. I just don't. Not going to bother with that. Other people have, and other people have challenged his lineage and everything else. Not my business. I'm not going to do that, but feel free to dig if you like. On the way back from Seattle, because he had made some trip to Seattle to participate in some sort of show there, he had seen an underwater UFO that was as large as an aircraft carrier, and this is one of the large stories that I think he recounts in Behold a Pale Horse, although it's been quite a few years since I've actually read that one. It is most informative to me to look, compare, contrast, and otherwise draw parallels between himself and other individuals that claim to be fighting for truth, patriotism, and the American way. But I digress. Let's see, his research at this point in time in 1991, which is the presentation I'm talking about, he claims that he's been doing it for 18 years. So, just basic math tells us that since 73. He claims that suppressed technology would, of course, cure all or most disease, create endless free or cheap energy, and, and then he takes time to plug his book quite a bit. Let's see what else. It has the most suppressed information. This is a quote. Has the most suppressed information in it than any other book in history. This is his quote about Behold a Pale Horse. You can examine that one for yourself if you like. I don't know what to say there. Anyway, moving on. Let's see. After seeing the UFO, he was given the standard sort of military thing that happens when you see something you really shouldn't have seen, which is, you can't discuss this with anybody, keep silent and all that. And, secrecy oaths are presented, and I've heard stories about this in other situations. So it almost seems realistic what he's describing here, or at least it is, what I would say consistent with other stories of similar incidents. Not necessarily involving UFOs, but other things, illegal operations, murders, people switching sides when they weren't supposed to, dead people showing up and still being alive. Things like this, they're often handed these secrecy oaths and told that they'll go to prison or, whatever else, be kicked out of the military, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, makes sense in light of, the next phase of his particular story. My input here is this. The creation or manufacture of credentials is standard operating procedure in intel circles, more often referred to as reputation or repudiation, actually, is very often a technique utilized by spooks of many stripes to assure their given audience that they and their agenda, associates, publication, correspondence, countries of origin, etc., are in fact in allegiance with the above mentioned audience. That's a quote from an essay I wrote back then. Anyway. Back to Bill. He then enters into the Office of Naval Intelligence, according to his point at the age of 24. His job is to, these are words he uses, to safeguard and to conduct intel briefings, to safeguard sensitive information and to conduct intel briefings. Now that's from my old notes, and it seems like that's pretty much what he was saying there. To secure sensitive information. These were, terms he used. Not unreasonable, not unrealistic, but a little bit hokey, considering the terminology generally used by spooks at that time. However, it does sound sort of legitimate, so here we go. Then he claims he was given command of a PT boat, given river patrol responsibilities in Vietnam, along a significant supply line, north of the DMZ, etc., claims that there was plenty of UFO interactions with all sorts of military, Vietnamese civilians, Vietnamese military, etc., in the area in which he was operating at that time, and that he was personally witness to many of these things, and it was common knowledge that this stuff was being out there, was occurring in that particular part of the world, and was, just part of the Vietnam War history, really. This is what he claims. Now, I've never really seen too many people that I found credible that made that claim, but it could be that I just did not dig enough for it. Let's see. Anyway, claims during the conflict. Okay. So the cover story for the UFOs at that time was enemy helicopter activity. According to him, this is the term used so that in radio broadcasts it wouldn't be heard, hey, we're looking at flying saucers. And he says that at no time did the enemy in Vietnam have helicopters, so therefore it was kind of a good cover, I guess. But, if you were somebody who was over there and fully aware that there was no need to have attack helicopters, and I've never even checked this out fully, to the best of my knowledge, anyway, whatever. Moving on, let's see. They sent him briefly to the Naval Investigative Service to conduct an investigation on his way home out of Vietnam after serving there for a while. Let's see. Then he winds up under the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, he says. That was Admiral Bernard Cleary, and he says he was attached to his briefing team. Now, this all makes, some sense in light of the, the discussion about him being in control of, or being trained to handle intel briefings. So he says he directed and disseminated various levels of top secret crypto and other documentation. He also states, and this is sort of a conglomeration now of a few things here because I really didn't get a clear idea from this at the time and wasn't aware, but he states that he really wasn't restricted by the sort of normal relative restrictions of compartmentalization that are often associated in intelligence work. You know, we don't normally let the bomb team know, you know, what we're doing on the ground in advance, except that they're going to be ready because the bomb team and the people that know that we're going to bomb the civilians might talk to each other and it'll screw with things. You know, the Manhattan Project and its compartmentalization is a fact of history. Things like this. So, you know, seems again very reasonable, very acceptable. He also says that, you know, he, let's see, okay, documents he saw regarding a project called Aquarius, showing that aliens and UFOs were real, recovered, and studied for thousands of years. And that, you know, that there were 2 crashes at Roswell, and then we get into the modern history. You know, he says that the secret societies have actually been engaged with, you know, conduct regarding these, you know, ETs for years and years. Okay, let's see, okay, so Project Sigma, this is specific stuff from his presentation that day in Georgia. Project Sigma evolved into the NSA. And I did say that right. He says Project Sigma evolved into the NSA. Now, if you try and study the history of the NSA, good luck figuring out why this all makes sense. But though it was started in 1947 to make contact with the homeworld of a single surviving alien from a crash in New Mexico, that is what later became the NSA. Now, he also says that this led to contact landings and an alliance forged at Edwards Air Force Base. He also tells you a little bit about how Edwards had a different name at a certain point. He says that President Dwight D. Eisenhower was part of this interplanetary diplomacy. He states that a criminal conspiracy is overwhelmingly provable regarding all of this, you know, etc., etc., etc. You know, I've seen lots of stuff regarding this kind of thing, and most of the time it's vaporous. Anyway, let me move on so I don't run out of time, because believe me, I took a lot of notes here. Then the space program and all things related are, you know, more the, you know, wasteful mechanism to cause, you know, certain things. They're really the wasteful mechanism to either unite humanity or divide humanity or to destroy humanity, depending on your point of view and depending on the point in his presentation. This is the way I understood it. Let's see. Then he, you know, gets into Groom Lake, Area 51, etc., etc. You know, encourages people to go to Nevada and see for themselves. You know, just a little ways away from Groom Lake, that if they want to spend a few days there, that they'll definitely see the test flying of these UFOs. And, you know, then we begin with the, you know, with what is best described as a VHS projector, because I know very well that I was looking at film of film in some cases, or film of photographs in some cases, or photographs of photographs, but being projected via videotape through one of these old VHS projectors. And I don't know how many people are familiar with those things. It's probably pretty antiquated, but believe me, they did exist. Anyhow, you know, we go to, let's see, the JFK section, of course. Now, he goes through this, shows, you know, the headshot 3 times, which I find interesting. You know, I've already covered pretty much where, you know, the U.S. information funded and supported documentaries were utilized. And also some broadcast footage was utilized from, you know, various sort of mainstream media sources You can even see in some versions of that Assassin Unmasked film that there's a graphic up there that he gives no explanation for, but it's actually in conjunction with a scientific program that was utilizing that cleaner version of the Zapruder film. Anyway, let's see. Oh, and you know what else got used a couple of times, by the way, is a very rare documentary which was created by the Secret Service and local Dallas TV assets. That was interesting to me, and if you want to see that, you can go to my YouTube channel. I'm not going to give you the link for it, but actually, I'm not sure if YouTube left it up, because YouTube has edited the crap out of me, but Daily Motion, the last time I looked, still had it up there. But you can find the Secret Service reenactment that I got from the National Archives, and it's a very clean black and white version. The Zapruder film is featured there, and that was done in the 1960s. So, you know, a much cleaner and crisper black and white version could have been gotten by Mr. Cooper if he had gone to the right part of the National Archives, I imagine. Anyway, all right. Now, there were also, like I said, frames from the Nostradamus, you know, biodrama called The Man Who Saw Tomorrow, I think it was. It was one that Orson Welles had narrated through most of. Let's see. And then we get on to the, the limo driver killed Kennedy hoax. You know, the problem here is not just that he's using a blurry film, but that he actually claims the documents specifically while he was being given, you know, almost unfettered access to multiple levels of stuff, which, you know, nobody ever bothers to question why in the world a naval commander in charge of the Pacific Fleet would require the knowledge that a Secret Service agent had used a weapon to shoot JFK in the face, nearly a decade earlier. Nobody asks that question, and, there's no purpose for that whatsoever, even if you want to make arguments about him actually seeing these UFO documents that he's going to get to in a little bit. But you know what? Let me stop with the commentary and keep on with the description. Let's see. The distortions inherent in the successive generations of videotape copies, okay? Blurring, shadows, lights, flickers, etc. You know what? How do I know about all this stuff? Because my eyes register light differently than other people. But I'm very sure that many of you can tell when a videotape has been copied and copied and copied. You start to see a shadow. You start to see inconsistent sort of artifacts of static. You see color distortions and erratic blurs and light shifts. And what I call color washing, where, you know, color is literally removed, either completely or partially. Sometimes this is due to bad wiring, bad connections in copies. We've all seen, probably if you've ever seen enough old crappy videotapes, you've seen videotapes where voices are not synced up with actors' mouths, to the point where, you know, you practically think you're looking at, again, I mentioned something dating myself, the old Kung Fu Theater sometimes, where, you know, the guy's speaking in Japanese and, you know, his mouth moves 80 different times and you hear him go, ha, ha, ha. You know what I mean? You can see videotapes like that all the time where the audio and the video are out of sync with one another. These are results often of, loss of information due to tracking. It's part of the mechanisms of these things. You can examine them if you want. If you don't believe me, it's fine. But I'm telling you, there's plenty of artifacts created just by the copying and recopying of copies that cause problems. I mean, even in the digital realm, you can find deterioration and degeneration in the quality of things. Anyway, I had a little knack for identifying source information at one point. I mean, I could actually see things that were, crossovers in broadcasts. I could see interference from similar wavelengths sometimes. I could occasionally see UHF bleeds when towers were too close to VHF transmissions, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But, you could also see radio interference when a transmitter was close by. You could always tell. You could actually hear the hums of some of this stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do if you're paying very close attention, especially with the more, analog type of broadcast, not like the digital stuff we have now, which really is of a lot less depth and seemingly is a lot more hollow to me when I do look at it. But anyway, again, I digress. Sorry. Audio and video orientation, these are important factors when looking at any of these people's evidence that they have when they claim to have something that is, absolutely authentic from the past. Sometimes you can see evidence of somebody literally filming a film, things like that, and that creates anomalies, in the visual presentation that some less observant individuals just might not pick up on. So anyway, and what else I could pick up now and then too is the occasionally, inconsistencies in flicker rates and things, very similar to, the old sort of idea about inserting, a few suggestive frames into a film in order to cause the suggestion. That stuff does work, but it doesn't work on me sometimes because the drastic change in the light wave, even for that brief moment, actually can cause somebody like me pain because of my sensitivity. That's why I really hate going to the movies and can't stare at a computer screen for more than a couple of minutes without it literally feeling like I have an ice pick going through my eyeball into my brain, which I'm sure some people would really like to hear that happen right about now, considering who I'm knocking. I don't know why he's a big hero. Anyway, enough of my commentary. Okay, then he shows, the Japanese version of his tape, which he says he sent to Japan. It's, again, a bad version of his tape, but they have now cranked up the color contrast, added a bunch of reds and greens to it, really thoroughly distorted and cartooned his already color-washed bad copy of the film. Except the Japanese have added some weird sort of eerie music and gunshots and things. And he did this live, not only on his video presentation. I'm talking about the live presentation. He cuts back to the U.S. Information Agency documentaries. Okay. Then back to the Japanese footage reports. And I got to tell you that if you wanted to, since the mid-90s, you could. Let me correct myself. I believe it's since the year 2000, but it may have been since the mid-90s. Ever since the Assassination Records Review Board acquired the physical copy of the Zapruder film, and I am making air quotes when I say that because I contend that the original film has been tampered with anyway. But even if you assume that document is entirely legitimate, the United States government took possession of it without taking possession of the copyright, for multiple millions of dollars, which they gave to the Zapruder estate. You can, if you wish, obtain a forensic copy, a direct copy from that original and take a look at the thing for yourself. It's very scratched up and kind of damaged now. I've seen a forensic copy, but even in its scratched up, damaged version, and you can have it actually reproduced in 35 millimeter format. It was originally an 8 millimeter format. But if you want to talk about extreme clarity, that original projected old tech sort of film gives you a depth and a character to that scene. You can literally see details in the reflections on the trunk of the car, and nothing like what you see on the internet. So if you ever get a chance to actually look at a film made from one of the earlier generations of that, you really should, because there are tons and tons of devils in those tons and tons of details. Anyway, when he was with Naval Intelligence, there was no hesitation whatsoever that President Kennedy was killed by, he says that he saw in the documents that there was no hesitation in those documents stating that President Kennedy was literally killed by limo driver William Greer of the Secret Service. Okay? that in the documents he saw that the ONI, the Secret Service, Division 5 of the FBI, and the CIA were all in collusion in doing so. The Division 5 fairy tale is directly from the Torbett document, which I have told you before was written as a piece of direct disinformation. It was something that Mae Brussel was suckered by as well. It contains narratives about people that don't exist. It contains buildings that don't exist, government agencies that do not participate in the responsibilities that are attributed to them, and all sorts of things that could not have possibly happened contemporaneous to the time period, because it just simply was not logistically possible to put people that were literally 2,000 miles away from one another in the same room and then put them again in another room 2,000 miles away an hour later. It just is full of holes. If you want to go get yourself a copy and read it, you can read the ridiculous story about NASA and the cover-up of the security agency for NASA that really was behind the killing of Kennedy, along with the FBI, who, you know, as much as Hoover might have hated the Kennedys, was not capable of pulling off an assassination. They didn't have that sort of juice at that time to pull off all this crap. Even in collusion, and the other thing is the collusion between the agencies at that time is another sort of ridiculousness. There's individuals that would have sooner shot each other in the face with shotguns than work with each other in that book, Working with Each Other. Plus non-existent things occurring, and non-existent assets performing non-existent duties. Anyways, so he claims that all this is laid out in there, and the reason is that JFK was a security risk to the nation and had ordered the above-mentioned CIA, of course, but other agencies as well, to cease the importation and sale of drugs to the American public, and to develop a plan to disclose the public ET visitations to the public, the ET visitations to Earth within the following year. So because he was going to reveal about aliens and he was going to fight the drug war, they killed him. On the face of it, that is stupid. Anyway, he also ordered the printing of constitutional, this is his words, constitutional legally backed silver money. This is a fallacy, Executive Order number 1110 myth. You know what? The U.S. notes, which were printed in 2s, 5s, and 100s, had existed since the 1920s and had continued to be printed until 1971. Take a look at what coincidentally happens in 1971. You might figure out why that changed. This, if you don't believe me, just take a look at G. Edward Griffin's article on it, written in 2000, if you like, called The JFK Myth. Anyway, moving on, and G. Edward Griffin, in case you're unaware, is the guy who wrote, what is pretty much the definitive book explaining the formation and the interested parties in the Federal Reserve and all that, and it's called The Creature from Jekyll Island, and if you haven't read it, I don't know why you're listening to my show. So, moving on, let's see, he says that, and the other thing that's interesting here is that if you actually read the executive order yourself, that's all you have to do. He actually surrenders his previously held executive privilege to print these things to C. Douglas Dillon, who was definitely a well-established banking person, who was the Secretary of Treasury at the time. Anyway, he also then adds in that he was going to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the four winds, although he's got the quote wrong there. I know what he's talking about, and that is true. He did make that statement both directly and indirectly, and most famously planted a story among two different mainstream journalists that he was friendly with, stating this and also stating that if a coup was going to occur less than a month before he was killed, that it would likely be coming from the CIA and not from a 7 days in May sort of scenario. Cooper claims that at this point he went AWOL for 3 days because he was so shocked by this. Then he takes a break and explains, gets the VHS projector fired back up again, and after a pretty lengthy Behold a Pale Horse plug, goes into a general description of UFO abduction, sort of classic overview of that, combined with brief sort of cursory discussion of mind control, generally hinting at MK Ultra experiments. I never remember him saying anything directly about MK Ultra, but he probably did. And then again, maybe I'm giving him too much credit. I don't want to say he didn't, but I don't recall it. Let's see, rapidly graduating into the RFID chip discussion and how the New World Order was using all of the above to support the troops. And the support the troops rhetoric regarding Desert Storm, the first incursion into Iraq, all that. It's first he says that publicly it was stated it was for oil, which, you know what, I remember those of us protesting against it saying that. I don't remember our president saying that at the time, but that's what he states. That first he said that. Then Secretary of State Baker said that we were going into Iraq for the sake of jobs. Then Bush says that people just don't get the message, that it is to stop naked aggression. And this is where people literally were comparing the haphazard dictator Hussein to Adolf Hitler and things like that for having invaded Kuwait, which, we could get into a whole discussion about that. But anyway, forget that. Now Cooper, says it is to create a legal precedence to allow the UN to become the one world government. These are, quotes and paraphrases. I'm trying to move along here. We then transmorph into the, quote, they will take our guns, end quote, situation. My opinion on the gun situation is that, you have a right to whatever it is that you choose, so long as you don't go hurting other people that don't need to be hurt. And that's where I'm at with it. However, I think that the overblown emphasis on the Second Amendment has been propped up a little bit too much, and here's why. See, no matter how many weapons you have in a protracted engagement with serious troops, it's very easy to sort of sucker people into using up and expending all their supplies. And unless you're going to become a well-skilled gunsmith and manufacturer of your own ammunition and firearms, this is a problem also. So for those of you who want to make sure and ensure that your guns are, always available to you, I would say this. That I suggest that you learn very well how to produce them yourself. Don't rely on the corporate entities that do produce your ammunition and your firearms to keep providing them to you, your parts, your accessories, etc. And I think that guilds of you should get together and do that. Now, it could be that you're already doing that, and I'm just ignorant of the fact because I'm legally disallowed from owning a firearm at this point, or from flying or leaving the country. Thank you very much. Anyway, then we go into his brief post-military career history, which I'll leave out here because, then the slideshow portion of the show begins, and I've got to tell you, this is one of the most informative and entertaining parts of Cooper's acts. And I definitely dropped a link to his entire four and a half hours of video that's available from that. I do believe that was a 6-hour deal, though, somehow. Maybe the breaks added to it or something else was left off of the tape there, but I'm pretty sure it was a 6-hour presentation because I got to go. Although, it's funny because I remember some of the questions that I heard, afterwards, and I listened very closely because the audience was not mic'd, but people did do a Q&A thing, and I remember some of the questions, but some of that stuff sounds very, does not ring a bell with me at all, and some other images, in the place, just in the venue, don't ring a bell with me. So perhaps it is either mislabeled or I'm thinking that I was supposed to go to Atlanta and actually saw another version of the very same sort of tour that Cooper was on at the time. I'm sure you can find evidence for his many appearances during that year and a couple other years in various parts of the country at a couple of different locations. So the slideshow portion begins, and about an hour and a half in. So we get to background info to sort of verify his personal story to some degree. Documents in slides showing some of his superiors, biographies. Let's see, many letters written to Cooper. Let's see, covers claims that he gave highly classified documents to a friend. Has a letter from that friend. Shows, quote, briefing documents, end quote, plus memos of sorts that he says reveal certain information that are not formatted, filed, or otherwise relatable to real documents I've seen personally. There are certain standards by which each agency sort of files these things, and you can often catch errors when people try to produce false documents. Let's see, let's go on a little bit though. The typeface orientation, reference font, and even the consistency of the, the consistency of the language, et cetera, in these documents is all really inconsistent, and you can see it for yourself if you want on that video. His slide presentation is pretty much, to me, at that time, I made a note that said, this guy equals a clip art show of Lex Luthor, the guy from the Superman comics, being the actual mastermind behind the, and I put in quotes, New World Order, with a badly photo clipped image. And here's the thing. You know what? If I used Photoshop, I could probably put Lex Luthor, Harry Potter, and Barack Obama together, telling you that they're, planning the lollipop death cult that will kill every man, woman, and child without the mark of the beast, unless they bow and kneel before the Khan, the great Muslim Pop-Tart. But it doesn't mean that it's real. I could probably create that if you like, but I'm really not in the mood for it. Then we rejoin the alien conspiracy during the slideshow, and he starts in on this Majestic 12, Majesty 12, the secret agenda, which Cooper says was called Majority 12, and that's a quote from him. This is often referred to in other people's documents and in UFO folklore and among some fairly legitimate, semi-legitimate, and completely illegitimate researchers regarding the extraterrestrial vehicles and the concepts thereof and the interdimensional travel of demonic entities and things like this as the MJ-12 documents. Then he, connects interesting people to it like Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, and, plenty of nice and shady characters, that just seem really interesting. Then he goes into a discussion about cattle mutilations, and hypes the mystery of that. Concludes that aliens are doing cattle mutilations to examine the effects of radiation on biological creatures. This is what he said, okay? And here's another interesting quote from that presentation, and I've seen this in more than one place, so I know he said this more than once. They leave the carcasses of the cattle as a, quote, act of terrorism by the aliens, end quote. Okay. Now, then we get into a couple of co-conspirator problems here where we got the Torbett document coming right back up again. The list includes, but is definitely not limited to, NASA, a special security agency for the American Space Agency, and, various factions and intrigues by people and things that did not exist, and puts the wrong agencies in charge of things that would not be involved in such an enterprise. And I can't wait to get to the score sheet. I really hope I do. Let me try and move along a little quicker. Let's see. UFOs over the White House. He shows you photos of that in the early 50s. He shows you, he continuously warns about the cashless society and how the cards are going to destroy money, and states over and over again that at that time, being 1991, that $100 bills are being withdrawn from circulation. They will soon all be gone. Then $50 bills will be withdrawn from circulation. They will soon all be gone, and there will be no cash at all. Anyway, then we go into the RFID chips. We go into the CIA monitors all broadcasts. This is incorrect because it's the NSA, but then again, he thinks that they were there to conduct, alien agenda communications and diplomacy. So let's see. Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, he says this various times. President Eisenhower met with and made binding agreements with the ETs. They're referred to in many documents and letters as the Etherians. Paper money is being withdrawn in total, says that again. Points to Eisenhower's farewell speech about the military-industrial complex, which I agree with him there. He misquotes it and explains that this is, of course, linked to the alien agenda, and he was warning us about that as well. There's an entertaining sort of, description with the audience here about the concept of debunking something. He pretty much says, hey, here I'm going to show you what debunking means. After he presents a photograph of an alien and says this has been debunked, but nobody's ever proven it's not real. Then he says, let me explain to you what is debunked, and goes up to an audience member and says, what's your name? The audience member says, my name is whatever, and then he says, no, it's not. Then he goes to another audience member and he says, what's your name? They say their name. He says, no, it's not. And then he says, that's what debunked means. Not making a judgment, I'm just reporting what happened. An electronic barrier was used at the DMZ in Vietnam. He was witness to this, although it did not work. This was the work of the Jason Society. Warning of the cashless society again, because they are behind it. If the world were run by women, the world would not be in the same shape we are in. We would not be in the same sad shape we are in. I'm not going to disagree with him there. That's very possible. We'd be in a completely wholly different pretzel shape. Anyway, evil women, actually, in my opinion, are a whole lot more inventive than evil men. So, quite honestly, the more loving a woman can be and the more wonderful and benevolent they can be, the flip side of that is that they can also be extremely more inventive when it comes to being vicious, cruel, and etc., etc. So women in charge would just mean that the tortures and the pains in this world would be a whole lot more exotic, in my opinion. Moving on. Let's see. UFOs really like power plants. They're often seen around power plants. Werner von Braun's Werner von Braun's teacher said that aliens assisted all of the technology that it has come out and is coming out, and he was referring to the 1991 version of technology. He then gets into the John Lear discussion about teleporting and that prediction about how you'll get into a phone booth in New York City and step out in a phone booth in Los Angeles. I dare anyone out there to actually find a phone booth anymore. Moving forward, teleportation has not become a reality, although this stuff was supposed to occur by the year 2000. Many, many things were supposed to occur by the year 2000. If you were around earlier and aware of some things, you would have heard plenty of that. Anyway, the John Lear thing was something that was picked up off of the CompuServe message boards, and I can attest to that personally. John Lear himself put out this stuff to begin with, and Cooper was one of the people on the CompuServe sort of early internet structures. Anyway, he claims that he has books published in the 1950s where we knew that the moon had an atmosphere, that there were colonies already there, that there was an interior section of the moon which was livable, etc., etc. There is life on Mars and Venus and other planets in our very little Milky Way. There is a domed settlement on the moon. He's doing this, pointing these things out in photographs while using a light pointer. He says he was part of Project Red Light. He goes to the Jackie Gleason story about having visited dead alien carcasses with our friend President Richard M. Nixon, according to Gleason's own writing in a posthumously presented narrative by Gleason, supposedly by his widow, that the U-2 was developed, the U-2 spy plane was developed by using alien technology. If that is true, then we are being visited by the retarded aliens. Thank you very much. U-2 technology sucks. That was my commentary. Sorry again. He then starts to show us aerial photographs and what he claims to be satellite photographs of Groom Lake, various parts of Nevada. Shows us what he purports to be a 6 mile long runway. Ends up showing us stuff from pages of things that he says were from Project Rand deep underground facilities. Shows us the Hughes Tools Company's version of a large drill. Then shows us other large sort of drills that are supposed to be very fascinating, interesting technologies that God knows what they are actually. I don't know personally, but this is what we're looking at. Then claims that there are being underground bases being built all over the country. Not saying I disagree with him there. There were many bunkers and things being built, especially after the known development of the Manhattan Project. There was a lot of underground facilities being built. I don't believe that they were all being built for the purposes that he claims they were. I think a lot of them were just for fallout, continuity of government, possibly continuing the human race. But there are also sort of unexplainable and unexplained underground facilities as well, so not going to argue with him there. I'm just telling you, giving you as best a description as I can. Jackie Kennedy. Now, this has always been a question when people would confront people about this, while the limo driver shot him, the idiocy that usually comes out of somebody's mouth, when you try to disprove them with a logical point like, well, why didn't Jackie say something if she was sitting right there and she could have seen or heard the gunshot, smelled the gunpowder, known that Greer shot him, etc., etc.? Well, here's your problem. The fact of the matter, according to Cooper, was that Jackie never spoke out because her children were under the guard of the Secret Service, who had absolutely murdered their father. And this is why she could never say anything. But when she was climbing out on the limo, as famously viewed in the Zapruder film, she was trying to escape the car knowing that Greer had shot her husband in the face. This is wholly ridiculous. First of all, Annie Oakley couldn't have pulled off that over-the-head shot. If you take a look at a clear film of it again, just go ahead to my Blind JFK Researcher YouTube channel if you like, and you can watch a frame-by-frame, perfectly corrected, nice, clear, crystal copy of the Zapruder film and observe that William Greer's hands, both of them, are on the steering wheel the whole time, though he does stare back and forth. And if you imagine the blurry vision or squint your eyes hard enough, you might be able to see that the shiny head of the guy in the passenger seat there might actually be giving you that gun impression in the film. Then he attaches himself to the Oswald in the doorway thing, which is also false biometric measurements, and not by a chiropractor who doesn't take all of the factors into account, but actually by examining this little tiny piece of the Altkins film. That is Billy Lovelady in that doorway, and I'm sorry, that's all I see. And that is all Oliver Stone saw when he blew it up to 8 feet tall to look at it himself. That is all that you can see, and I know that Harold Weisberg might have meant well when he perpetrated that one on us for many, many years. And it is fascinating to think that he might have been standing in the doorway, but it is not him. Okay, so just so you know at this point, the Kennedy assassination, he goes into a little bit of a lengthy thing that, by Cooper's definition, I just want you to know something right now. By Cooper's definition, Secret Service and civilian agents of the same who disagree with his points about JFK, and that means William Greer killed him, Oswald is in the doorway, and the Secret Service covered it up because the Secret Service was the agency involved, and Jackie Kennedy couldn't speak out about it because that's the way it went down, and all that stuff. Anybody who disagrees is an agent of the United States Secret Service engaged in disinformation. Okay. Then he goes into population reduction. Okay, and let's see, it addresses it to to decrease population and simultaneously create a more equitable distribution system of resources. Is very logical, he says, to actually do both. Let's see. War, famine, and pestilence will be a death rate solution instead of a birth rate solution to the population problem on the planet. Population control instead of birth rate control. Right. Okay, a period of great transition will ensue. And then he begins to point to, and here's the problem. It's not all bad information. It becomes so convoluted and so obfuscated with nonsense that it discredits the good information. So that when someone who does honestly bring out the good information, okay, comes out and gives you the reality about the Federal Reserve, or tells you that, yes, there were government agencies involved in the assassination of JFK, but it wasn't the Secret Service murdering him directly. They were just hungover, irresponsible, and asinine, okay, and had assisted in the cover-up because they were trying to CYA, okay. If somebody tells you that, well, they are just as strongly discredited now because they will lump us together. And notice that the lumping together of all of these assertions, which are all over the map, are exactly the playbook that is utilized by those who seek to discredit those of us they call conspiracy theorists. And I'm responding to a private message there, but I wanted to make sure that got out there because I'm sitting there and having somebody tell me that they agree with everything that I'm describing Cooper said. And I'll tell you what, you know who you are, and I'll just remove you from my Skype list because I don't want to argue about it any longer. Okay, then he says that the Club of Rome, the Club of Rome is actually trying to ensure the survival of humanity. That they are kind of on our side. Okay, there's a new state's constitution, which is already in place. There is a base on the moon for the elites. The only survival for mankind lies within colonization of other planets, and this is just for you, Desert Hawk. The moon has a livable atmosphere. Project Adam and Eve is the name of that venture, which was designed to develop this. Evidence of nuclear explosions around the moon having happened there. There are pyramids and vehicles parked in at least 3 places on the moon. This is prior to the date of the moon landing. These photographs are from. There's clouds in the atmosphere of the moon. There are square craters on the moon with right angles, which do not occur in nature. There are lakes on the moon. There are boulders rolling downhill on the moon. There are triangular-shaped openings in the moon. There are, planes and giant crosses on the moon. There are giant Christian crosses, literally on the lunar surface. Then he starts to, he does a book plug again, of course. Then we go into a Mars, the Mars face, the face on Mars. There are forts on Mars, there are pyramids on Mars, there's a Sphinx on Mars, there are right angles that seem to be some sort of roadways or something on Mars. There's flows of either water or sand, he can't tell which, but they seem to be water to him. The face is is detailed enough to have very extreme details in the eyeballs and teeth on Mars. There are also airplanes. There's a Mars airplane which is being developed, which makes no sense if there is no atmosphere. There is square craters on Mars. The face on Mars is more than 1 mile across. Has a letter from Gordon Cooper, astronaut Gordon Cooper, to the UN, talking about what to do about the alien creatures that have visited the Earth. Let's see. Then he recounts a story of an incident where aliens stole nuclear components from a silo and were shot by guards, melting an M16 into non-existence. Then he starts discussing the Billy Myers UFO photos. Most of the Myers photos, to my knowledge, have been thoroughly discredited. They're, the hubcap and cake cover things that are plopping around. But maybe I'm wrong about that. Forget it. Let's see, he also says he has a degree in photography at this point. I want you to remember that he says he has a degree in photography. Anyway, let's see, the Aurora Craft installation, the UFO, Groom Lake deal again. At one point he explains the photo. Okay, at one point he even explains about one of his slides that he took a photo of a slide, then transferred it, created a photo. Okay, created a photo. This takes a second. Created a photo from a slide, then a Polaroid, then created a photo again from it to make the slide. Then he says that Stephen Hawking is the new Albert Einstein. Let's see. UFO. Okay, UFOs generate clouds. Then he shows pictures of clouds and believes that that they actually generate clouds as a matter of their propulsion, etc., etc. Okay, fine. Let's see, the USSR and the USA have been secret allies since World War II to colonize the moon. Moon landings or photos of are wrong, or the moon has atmosphere. This is what he says. Yeah, the moon landing, in other words, the moon landing photography is either faked or, or the moon, the ideas of the moon not having an atmosphere are fake. One or the other is true. Let's see, he goes into Stan Barrington. Right, it was a guy who actually did the same sort of presentations for him in other parts of the countries, because it is noteworthy. It is noteworthy that, yes, I don't know if there's an atmosphere on Mars. That's another private message. I don't know. I'm not claiming to know. I'm just giving you the list of assertions here. Anyway, yeah, Barrington is one of the guys that participated in some of these early projects with him. He also claims that he was a member of Delta Force who had been multiple times charged with guarding UFOs. Okay, and then he gets into another book plug. He says the Close Encounters, E.T., and V, and alien spaceships at the 1984 Olympics were all used to pave the way for the real ETs that are already here. Let's see, he says, I am not opposed to a one-world government. It is unavoidable. That is a quote from at least two of his presentations, just so you know. But then he goes on to describe how it should be voluntary and it should be benevolent, and if it were, it would be fine. A one-world government would make sense so we could defend ourselves from the extraterrestrials. I'm not kidding you. Go examine the footage yourself, and you'll find him saying it, and probably more than one of those presentations. I don't have years to go back over this stuff. I really don't have the patience, actually, to go back over this stuff again. So, but it's there, and I dropped many links in chat during this show. Okay, most people participating in UFO discussions on TV, radio, or other areas, or other places. You know what? I can't read my own handwriting there. But basically, he says that anybody who's discussing it on TV, radio, movies, anywhere else, anybody who's doing that, the majority of those people are government agents. So people that seem to insist on bringing up space travel, extraterrestrials, and things like that in open public forums are government agents. That's okay, Desert Hawk. That means you and I are both government agents, because I'm a government agent because I disagree with him on JFK, and since you like to bring up space travel very often and sort of unprovoked, you too are in fact a government agent. From the grave he goes. Anyways, let's see, Nixon had a military coup at the time. You know, that's a misinterpretation. I don't even want to cover that. The idea that the military was taken out of Nixon's hands is true, even though he was still president at the time. There was a reason for that. There is a chronological purpose behind that. I don't have time to discuss it now, another time. Then he goes into Project Mogul, which many people who have looked at the UFO phenomenon, the MUFON situation, all that, anybody who's ever looked at that kind of stuff has heard of the Project Mogul deal. It has been accused of being many things, and most people have sort of assigned it as a weather balloon sort of thing. It's a weird weather balloon project. I don't fully understand it, but I really never cared enough to dig. And this is all going on during his slideshow, by the way. These are being done, and I'm going to give you a numbers count toward the end here, my scorecard, I call it, and I took two of them. I took one at the time I was there and one from the video, and it gives you a good idea of the amount of stuff that was handed to me and you're barraged with at one of these live presentations. Okay, let's see. The weather balloons, right. All right, so Project Mogul, the weather balloons, throws doubts on the Roswell. Now he starts to throw doubts on the Roswell crash. Maybe it wasn't real. Maybe the people on the farms actually did find weather balloons. He thinks that that's a really good possibility. And then maybe this whole thing has actually been fabricated in order to mislead people. Now, it's funny because it seems to contradict itself back and forth during the presentation. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I, have trouble understanding the English language in my 40s here. You guys go ahead and take a look at it. Tell me I'm wrong, please. Because I'm so tired of discussing this guy. This is the last time I'm going to do it. That's why I devoted the show to it. Because I'm done. Anyway. NSDD. All right. National Security Directives. Okay. Claims that they're signed by AutoPen. This is a valid point. He says that the Council on Foreign Relations owns all media. He says that this Council on Foreign Relations plot and disinformation and the New World Order itself is not a Jewish plot. He says that it is not a communist plot. The Illuminati is not a religious gathering of individuals. They are from all religions. Okay. Then later on, he sort of hints that publicly they are from all different religions, but privately there may be something else happening. Again, I'm not disagreeing with all this. Then he mildly touches on the prison industrial complex and how people were being paid for and, slave labor being acquired to create products, things like this. This is all valid discussion points, but he just briefly goes over it. Oh, let's see. All this extraterrestrial stuff may not be real. They may be using, and he says it himself during his presentation, all this extraterrestrial stuff may not be real. They may be using me to spread this. Immediately following that statement, he claims that CNN is an independent news organization. And probably the only one that broadcasts to a large audience. CNN. I want you to soak that in for a second. Okay. The mechanism of war, he claims, will be replaced by a wasteful, pointless, false sort of space program that will go nowhere. There is a public space program. There is a secret space program. The public space program is a wasteful sort of funneling of money in order to make us more broke and more enslaved and to spread disinformation, essentially. Now I'm paraphrasing. Anyway, he claims that he sent letters and packets to every congressperson that was in office at the time, every senator in office at the time, the president, the vice president, and the attorney general, not to mention many random citizens. Then he shows, hello, I'm one of them. And there's probably more out there. Random citizens when he acquired other people's mailing lists. Now, the amount of money that was spent on just that mailing was fairly significant. Videotapes were not exactly dirt cheap. Mailing was not exactly dirt cheap at the time. Envelopes, it was wrapped in, paper, actually. It was like wrapped in paper bags and things, if I remember correctly. But there was, information, contact information, business cards. I had received a couple of mailings that were connected to Cooper. Not too many, but one time was like a manila envelope just stacked with documents. I'm being generous by calling them documents. They were really the waste of a tree. Moving on, it's at this point in the presentation that he goes through about his fifth or sixth sort of mini lecture on "Don't Be a Racist," which he did a lot when he did presentations in the South, I am told, and seemed to do a lot. Good on him there. The only race you should be concerning yourselves with is the human race, or the race of whatever it is we are beyond the skin that we are currently tethered to. So good on him there. Now the Q&A goes on for about 30 minutes, and there are some interesting things that happen. During that, he solidly handles the Federal Reserve question, although he sort of misses the mark and thinks that we'll all be tattooed very, very shortly, like imminently, and it is over 20 some odd years later. We have not been tattooed. We are trading a whole lot more with cards, but they haven't gone to the localized sort of imprisonment of individuals by only allowing their cards to be useful in certain areas yet, which was part of his predictions. He gets involved in some sort of little tete-a-tete with an audience member who starts to lecture him about the situation a little, tells them to move it on, and then somebody yells out about, some racial epithets, and we end up with the whole, another, yet one more "Don't Be a Racist" mini lecture, which again, I say, is definitely a valuable thing to repeat, because it is a pointless waste of time. We go back into the cashless society, the $100 bills leaving circulation, which I did already cover, but he handles it again. Okay, we will all be tattooed with UPC codes. And he relates that to the Book of Revelations, the parallel of the Mark of the Beast, states he is a Christian, and then begins talking about how the Book of Revelations, although it seems to be coming very, very true in his mind, and he is a Christian, it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not, or if anybody is, because after all, those in the Illuminati are utilizing the Book of Revelations as a script. They are acting out plague, pestilence, and all of these things upon us based on that particular script. Here I will say he is correct. But unfortunately, the Book of Revelations is an echoing and recurring sort of narrative which has come up many times. The idea of the end of the world, the concept which pre-existed everything, and was, of course, assisted by the misunderstandings of natural disasters and disease and things like that throughout recorded history and even pre-recorded history. I'll get into that subject one of these days, and I don't mean previous to recorded history. I do mean pre-recorded history. We will examine that at some point when I get into historical documentation, and probably I'm going to do a little show about that. But this is the end of my discussion on Bill Cooper. Okay? I don't want to do it privately anymore. I don't want to do it on the air. I don't want to argue about it. Behold a Pale Horse is an interesting thing. It is something that is useful in that it gives you a new way to look at certain things, but some of it is flat wrong. Some of it is off. I don't know where some of it came from, but I do know exactly where the JFK stuff came from. I do know exactly where the misrepresentations of some of his evidence came from. I do know exactly how the photography thing was achieved. You know, he's a photographer, he understands. Well, then he does know that there are certain distortions inherent in photographing or videotaping a projection that creates all sorts of light, all sorts of light-driven anomalies and inconsistencies in tone. You take a color photograph and you turn it black and white, and then you turn it back to color. You can do lots of different things with this. You change the lighting just ever so slightly. You change the intensity, the tone, the brightness, the exposure. You can do all sorts of things. And all that happened here regarding this gun that people claim to see in the Zapruder film is that he had a shitty copy. Bottom line. If you believe that William Greer shot JFK in the face, then please go to YouTube, find yourself a channel with some Barney and the Dinosaur replays, and enjoy that. Because that's about how realistic that is. As far as the alien agenda, I'll say this. I don't know enough to combat the absolute volume of stuff here. And let's talk about the numerical volume of stuff here in my last 15 minutes. And I'm sure everybody's going to be glad this one's all over with. Because I am. Okay. I'm going to tell you what I totaled up. And I did this twice, okay? I did this with my friend in the 90s, and he sent me my original score sheet. Okay? And then I sat for 4.5 hours and went over this tape to see if the score sheet was accurate. And my numbers in most cases were dead on or within a margin of error of 3. Okay? So you can take any of these numbers and go up or down by 3, and I know I'm still correct because, my eyes at the age of 19 and my ears and eyes at the age of 42 are telling the same story about the same presentation from the same man, about the same, convoluted presentation. And I want you to keep that in mind when you think about the validity and the individuals that swear that this is the foundation for what it is we're all doing. This is not the foundation for what I do. This is not the foundation for what everybody does. Is it the foundation for what our good friend AJ does? Well, pretty much, if you take away some of the alien agenda and you add the hyperbolic Christian demonic agenda to it, it's the same script. And you know what? I dropped some things in chat, and I have more, and you can find plenty more of them where they were buddy-buddy on air, and then you can hear AJ attacking him if you want, and these clips are available all over the place. You can hear Cooper attacking him. You can hear what sounds to me like, manufactured conflict between two individuals who were handed scripts. That is my opinion, my personal opinion. It does not reflect the opinion of anyone else on this station, the management, or anybody that I know of directly at this very moment. But I am very sure that it is the most sane opinion that can be garnered from the two of them. And I'm getting angry about it because I'm getting very sick of being lumped in with or being told that I'm trying to do or trying to continue the work of, or that I am just ripping off, or that I'm just part of the same thing that those guys were. The only thing that I have in common here is that it is radio, it is broadcast, and I am in search of truth. And in fact, I'm in search of honesty more than truth. But I digress once more. So what did I total up? I decided to total up the number of photos, okay, the number of maps, the number of book pages, the number of memos, and we'll use air quotes there for the word memos, the number of general records, military documents, textbooks from military, etc. in one category, letters written to Cooper and letters written to others, UFO magazine articles. These are UFO-type underground publications, which mostly don't exist except in internet form now, where you can, go to plenty of fun websites where they tell you that, in fact, most of the people around you are aliens and all of that kind of good stuff. Your dogs were actually born on a planet called Dog. Things like this. Have fun with that. And, even funnier is my doggy's looking at me while I say it. Okay. Let's see. So a number of drawings, a number of newspaper clippings, a number of charts, which he claims to have assembled and generated himself. I then created a couple of subcategories just to categorize some of these other things outside of their general description. A couple of things he added for sheer comic relief, like a picture of Marilyn Monroe for no apparent reason, and a picture of Lassie, things like this. Let's see. The true and false documents, where he claims that both truth and falsehoods are both being represented in documents that are both legitimate and illegitimate. The skip to flash next, or, I don't have time for it documents number, and the I don't know what this is number. And I shouldn't say documents, I should say slides. So these are slides. Some of them are documents. Okay, we've already been over this. Now, the total number of slides, according to my account, again, there is a margin of error of plus or minus 3, is 347. This is what I tried to capsulize for you. 104 photographs, ostensibly, though most of them are photographs of photographs or representations of photographs or photographs of some other visual image, not text. Okay, moving on. 15 maps, 38 book pages, 69 memos, general records, military documents, etc., blah, blah, blah. 25 letters, mostly to Cooper, but also some correspondence, just correspondence between individuals. 27 UFO magazine articles. These are dedicated UFO, sort of UFO fanzines. There was 19 of those. There were 12 drawings that he claimed to be original drawings he got from direct sources. There were 25 newspaper clippings. There were 13 charts that he generated himself. That is what the 347 grand total is composed of. The comic relief section is 13 pieces. The true and false, which he does have true and false factoids contained within said documents, and claims that documents are legitimate and illegitimate at the same time, is 22 occurrences. The skip flash, I don't have time, or next, just without explanation, slides is 55, and the I don't know slides is 21. Now, for somebody who conducted these things quite often, for somebody who spent many, many years very focused on this, spent a considerable amount of money focused on this, that doesn't seem to be very efficient use of slides. And that's not even counting the video presentation I talked about with the VHS projector. That was a whole other section. Now do you see why it took 6 hours with a couple of breaks here and there? And you can't blame the guy for taking breaks and sitting down. After all, he only had the one leg. He had the one leg partially shot off and, had his skull crushed and, was kind of handicapped at this point. So, I can't blame him for wanting to sit down with the audience and all that. But here's the deal, as far as I'm concerned, and I know I'm running low on time, and again, I appreciate anybody who stuck with me through this broadcast. But man, I just wanted to do one show about this so that I don't have to talk about it again. I don't want to discuss this guy. I don't want to discuss AJ. I don't want to discuss the relation to this. I may bring the two of them up when I actually do my JFK Myths show, because I'm going to require a myths show in order to cover all of the nonsense which is circulating which is just absolutely, flatly, factually inaccurate. As I've said many times, you can drop, the idea out there that a rather sophisticated dog with an opposable thumb happened to grip an M16 that was laying in the car of a Secret Service agent who had fallen asleep while getting a Hummer from an alien hooker and had actually popped a cap in the back of JFK's head, if you like. But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to participate in it. And I really feel as though the stuff that Cooper propagated, for the most part, although there was some factual stuff, there was some useful stuff intermingled with the nonsense, was nonsense. He misrepresents, misquotes, and misunderstands a lot of things. And his so-called documentation most of the time is inconsistent even with itself. It is not consistent with any sort of documentation which is contemporaneous to the time periods in which he claims it was generated. It's very simple. There are filing procedures under which certain documents would appear. There are signatures that would appear on certain documents. There are individuals that would be allowed to see those documents. There are offices through which and filing systems by which each of these documents would have been preserved for him to be able to find them in the National Archives or to find them by Freedom of Information Act requests, etc., etc. These things are not present. They are not backed up in most of his documentation. Sometimes they are. I don't say it's all fiction, but some of it is manufactured. I don't claim that I know the author of the manufacture, but some of it is very much just manufactured. So, I leave you to judge it any which way you want, but this is where I stand on it, and I no longer want to be involved in the category with this guy. Doesn't mean that I care that he's broadcast on this network at night. I don't agree with Mae Brussels' figures on a lot of things, but I have some respect for what she did. Cooper I respect because he served our country at one point. That, I believe, is a documented reality. So I give him my respect for that. And I assume that he did that with honesty and integrity. But the realistic possibility that a guy who was working on the briefing team for the commander of the United States Naval Pacific Fleet requiring the information about a shellfish toxin pellet being fired into the face of JFK by a limo driver in 1963 while he is being attached to this team in the 1970s seems just sort of this side of unrealistic to me to begin with. Now, most famously, Jimmy has said to me on the air that, well, maybe he had been passed documents in order to mislead him. Well, is that the most likely explanation, or is it more likely that he fabricated this as a way to prop up his assertions based on his crappy copy of the Zapruder film, and once making that claim, clutched to it until the day he died? Because after all, not too many people like to admit when they're wrong. Not too many people like to be called out for having the wrong information. I don't like it, but I accept it. And I'll tell you what, I hope that somebody can show me solid proof that I'm wrong about every single thing I've ever said on the air. I would love to be able to go away quietly and smile and enjoy the rest of my life and know that my children's futures are fine. But, everybody's got to wake up sometime. And the day-to-day struggle doesn't allow me to daydream long enough to live my entire life. That is my viewpoint. That is what I presented tonight. And I hope that you guys stay tuned for After the Last Cup. I hope that I gave you guys something to look at tonight. And what else can I say? Bye-bye, UCY.TV. The Ochelli effect is done for the night.
Yeah. At the age of 19 in 1962, she was
But I have the files. You know, I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, you know, pistols and fondle slab of choice, and the internet, professional wrestling, and not Jesse Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from as long as it's real. It doesn't. It's hard to get real information because seriously, they don't want you to have